sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when we least expect them. After 36 hours straight in the emergency room, saving lives and holding hands with the dying, one nurse thought her hardest day was finally over. She had no idea that her real test was just beginning, or that a chance encounter with America's most elite warriors would change everything she thought she knew about service, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a hero. Margaret Maggie Chen had always believed that the hardest part of being a trauma nurse was learning to let go. After 15 years working in the emergency department at San Diego General Hospital, she had mastered the delicate art of caring deeply while maintaining enough emotional distance to function. But, on this particular Tuesday in March, even her well-practiced defenses were cracking under the weight of what had been the longest shift of her career. The day had started normally enough. Maggie arrived at 6 in the morning, her dark hair pulled back in its usual neat ponytail, her scrubs fresh and her mind focused on the tasks ahead. She had no way of knowing that she was about to embark on a 36-hour marathon that would push every limit she thought she had. The first sign that this wouldn't be an ordinary day came when the ambulance sirens started wailing before 7 a.m. and didn't seem to stop. A multi-car accident on the interstate had sent 5 critically injured patients their way, followed by a construction site collapse that brought in 3 more. By noon, the emergency department was running at full capacity, with every bed occupied and a waiting room full of people who needed care but would have to wait their turn. Maggie moved between patients with the fluid efficiency that comes only from years of experience. She started IVs on dehydrated children, cleaned and dressed wounds on construction workers, and held the hand of an elderly woman who was scared and alone while waiting for test results. Each patient became the center of her world for the minutes or hours she spent with them, receiving her complete attention and care before she moved on to the next person who needed her help. Around 3 in the afternoon, things took a turn for the worse. A teenager was brought in after a diving accident, his spine injured and his future uncertain. Maggie found herself working alongside Dr. Rodriguez to stabilize him while his parents waited in agony just outside the trauma bay. The boy's name was Kevin, and he kept asking if he would ever walk again. Neither Maggie nor the doctor could give him the answer he desperately wanted to hear. As evening approached, Maggie realized she had been on her feet for over 12 hours without a real break. Her back ached, her feet throbbed in her comfortable shoes, and she had grabbed only quick bites of food between patients. But there was no time to rest. More ambulances kept arriving, and her colleagues were just as exhausted as she was. The night shift was already working overtime from the previous day, and calling in additional staff would take hours. The real test came around midnight when a family of 4 was rushed in after their house fire. The parents had managed to get their 2 young children out, but not before everyone had suffered from smoke inhalation. The father also had severe burns on his hands and arms from breaking through a window to create an escape route. Maggie found herself caring for the 6-year-old daughter, a little girl named Emma who was frightened and struggling to breathe. Working with Emma required all of Maggie's skill and patience. The child was scared, calling for her mommy, and fighting against the oxygen mask that she needed to help her lungs heal from the smoke damage. Maggie sat beside Emma's bed, speaking in soft, soothing tones, telling her stories about brave princesses and magical kingdoms while monitoring her vital signs and adjusting her care as needed. The princess was very brave, Maggie whispered to Emma, stroking her hair gently. She knew that sometimes we have to wear special masks to help us breathe better, just like you're doing now. And, do you know what? The princess always got better because she was so good at being brave. Emma's eyes, wide with fear and trust, never left Maggie's face. Gradually, the little girl stopped fighting the oxygen mask and allowed herself to relax into the hospital bed. Her breathing became easier, and her vital signs stabilized. But Maggie couldn't leave her side. Every time she tried to step away, Emma would become agitated again. Hours passed with Maggie sitting beside Emma's bed, one hand monitoring the child's pulse while the other held Emma's small fingers. She watched the sun rise through the hospital windows, marking the beginning of her second day without sleep. Other nurses came and went, checking on them both and offering to take over, but Emma had bonded with Maggie and wouldn't accept care from anyone else. By morning, Emma's condition had improved enough that she could be moved to the pediatric ward where her family was waiting. Maggie walked alongside the gurney, still holding Emma's hand, until they reached the elevator that would take the little girl up to her new room. As the elevator doors closed, Emma waved goodbye with a small smile on her face, and Maggie felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment that came with knowing she had made a real difference in someone's life. But her shift wasn't over. More patients kept arriving throughout the morning, and Maggie found herself running on nothing but coffee, determination, and the adrenaline that comes from knowing that people's lives depend on your ability to keep going. She treated a man who had suffered a heart attack while jogging, helped stabilize a woman who had fallen downstairs and broken her hip, and assisted with a complicated case involving a motorcyclist who had been hit by a car. Each patient brought their own story, their own fears, and their own needs. Maggie gave each one her complete attention, never letting her exhaustion show, never allowing them to feel like they were just another case to be processed. She remembered that behind every medical emergency was a person with a family, with dreams, with people who loved them and were waiting for them to come home. As the afternoon wore on, Maggie began to feel the effects of being awake for more than 30 hours. Her hands remained steady, her mind stayed sharp when it mattered, but, in the quiet moments between patients, she could feel her body beginning to rebel against the demands she was placing on it. Her feet felt like they were on fire, her shoulders ached from leaning over beds and equipment, and she had developed a persistent headache that pounded in rhythm with her heartbeat. Dr. Rodriguez noticed her condition and tried to convince her to take a break, even offering to have someone cover her patients for a few hours. But Maggie knew that the emergency department was still understaffed and that stepping away would only put more pressure on her colleagues who were just as tired as she was. She declined the offer and continued working, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The breaking point came around 4 in the afternoon when an elderly man was brought in after collapsing at home. His wife had found him unconscious on their kitchen floor, and the paramedics had been working to stabilize him throughout the ambulance ride to the hospital. His name was Robert Thompson, and, according to his wife Dorothy, he was a retired Marine who had served in Vietnam. Robert's condition was serious but not immediately life-threatening. He had suffered what appeared to be a minor stroke, but his vital signs were stable and he was conscious and alert. What struck Maggie most was the obvious love between Robert and Dorothy, who had been married for 53 years and still held hands like teenagers. Dorothy was terrified but trying to be brave for her husband, while Robert kept apologizing for scaring her and making such a fuss. Maggie spent the next several hours working with Robert and Dorothy, coordinating his care with the doctors, arranging for tests and consultations, and providing the emotional support that both of them needed during this frightening time. Dorothy was exhausted from her own emotional ordeal, and Maggie helped her find a comfortable chair where she could rest while staying close to her husband. "He's always been so strong," Dorothy told Maggie during one of their quiet conversations. 53 years of marriage, and I've never seen him sick a day. He still mows our lawn, still fixes everything that breaks around the house. I don't know what I would do without him." Maggie listened and offered comfort, sharing her professional knowledge in terms that Dorothy could understand while being honest about Robert's condition and prognosis. The tests showed that Robert had indeed suffered a mild stroke, but, with proper treatment and rehabilitation, he had an excellent chance of making a full recovery. By the time Robert was stable enough to be admitted to the neurology unit for continued observation and treatment, it was nearly 8 o'clock in the evening. Maggie had been at the hospital for almost 36 hours straight, caring for dozens of patients and their families, making countless decisions that affected people's lives and well-being. As she watched Robert and Dorothy disappear down the hallway toward the elevator, Maggie felt the full weight of her exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. Her legs were shaking, her vision was slightly blurry from fatigue, and she realized that she couldn't remember the last time she had sat down for more than a few minutes. Dr. Rodriguez appeared at her side, having finished his own marathon shift. "Maggie, you need to go home. Now. That's an order from your attending physician and your friend. You've been incredible today, but you're human, not a machine." For once, Maggie didn't argue. She knew that she had reached the end of her physical and emotional resources, and that continuing to work in her current state wouldn't be fair to future patients who deserved a nurse who was alert and capable. She nodded wearily and headed toward the staff locker room to gather her belongings. As she changed out of her scrubs, Maggie reflected on the past 36 hours. She thought about Emma, the brave little girl who had trusted her completely. She remembered Kevin, the teenager whose life had been changed forever by a moment of bad luck. She pictured Robert and Dorothy, still holding hands after more than 5 decades together. Each patient had touched her life in some way, reminding her why she had chosen nursing as her profession and why she continued to find meaning in work that was often thankless and always demanding. Walking through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, Maggie felt like she was moving through thick fog. Every step required conscious effort, and she found herself using the wall for support as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, creating halos that made her already blurry vision even worse. She knew she was experiencing the effects of extreme sleep deprivation, but she also knew that thousands of nurses across the country dealt with similar shifts every day. It was part of the job, part of the commitment they had made to care for others regardless of the personal cost. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour, with most of the day shift workers having gone home hours earlier. Maggie's small Honda Civic sat alone under a flickering light, looking as tired as she felt. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion and low blood sugar. She realized she couldn't remember eating anything substantial since her hurried sandwich at lunch the previous day. As she approached her car, Maggie noticed that something was wrong. The front tire on the passenger side was completely flat, sitting on the concrete floor of the garage like a deflated balloon. She stared at it for a long moment, her exhausted brain struggling to process this new problem. After everything she had been through over the past day and a half, a flat tire felt like the universe playing a cruel joke on her. Maggie had changed tires before, but never in her current state of exhaustion, and never while wearing the comfortable sneakers that were part of her work uniform. She popped the trunk and looked at the spare tire, jack, and tools that she would need, trying to summon the energy to tackle this unexpected challenge. Her hands were shaking now, and she could feel tears of frustration beginning to form in her eyes. Just as she was wondering if she should call a taxi or ask someone from the hospital for help, Maggie heard footsteps echoing through the parking garage. She looked up to see 4 men in military uniforms approaching her car. Even in her exhausted state, she could tell these weren't ordinary soldiers. They moved with a precision and awareness that spoke of elite training, and their uniforms bore the insignia of the Navy SEALs. The man in front, who appeared to be their leader, was tall and athletic with graying hair at his temples and kind eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the situation. The other 3 were younger but carried themselves with the same quiet confidence. They had been visiting a wounded teammate in the hospital and were heading to their own vehicles when they noticed Maggie's predicament. "Ma'am, looks like you could use some assistance," the leader said, his voice respectful but authoritative. There was something in the way he addressed her, using the formal ma'am that spoke of military courtesy and genuine respect. Maggie looked up at them, suddenly aware of how she must appear. Her hair was disheveled after 36 hours of work, her face was pale with exhaustion, and she probably looked like she was about to collapse. "I just finished a really long shift," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I can manage, but thank you for offering." The SEAL leader studied her face for a moment, and Maggie could see recognition dawning in his eyes. "Ma'am, are you a nurse here at the hospital?" he asked. "Yes, I work in the emergency department," Maggie replied, wondering how he had guessed. "How long was your shift, ma'am?" asked one of the younger SEALs, a man with red hair and freckles who looked like he might be from the Midwest. "About 36 hours, Maggie said, immediately feeling like she needed to explain. "We were short-staffed, and there were some complicated cases that needed continuity of care." "It's not unusual, really. Nurses do this kind of thing all the time." The 4 SEALs exchanged glances, and Maggie could see something pass between them that she didn't understand. The leader stepped forward and, gently but firmly took the tire iron from her hands. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're not changing this tire," he said. "Not after what you've just done. Please, allow us to take care of this for you." Before Maggie could protest, the 4 elite warriors had efficiently organized themselves around her car. The leader directed the operation while the other 3 began the process of changing her tire. They worked with the same precision and teamwork that they brought to their military missions, treating this simple automotive repair as if it were a matter of national security. As they worked, the red-haired SEAL, whose name was Petty Officer Jake Morrison, struck up a conversation with Maggie. My mom's a nurse, he said as he loosened the lug nuts. Been working in ICU for 20 years. She's told me stories about shifts like yours, taking care of people when you can barely stand up yourself. Maggie found herself opening up to these strangers in a way that surprised her. Maybe it was the exhaustion lowering her usual defenses, or maybe it was something about their genuine interest in her work and their obvious respect for what she did. She told them about Emma, the little girl with smoke inhalation who had needed someone to hold her hand through the long night. She described Robert and Dorothy, the elderly couple who had reminded her of the enduring power of love even in the face of medical crisis. You know what's interesting, ma'am, said another SEAL, a quiet man with dark skin and intelligent eyes who introduced himself as Petty Officer Marcus Williams. People think what we do is the hardest job in the military, but I've never had to work 36 hours straight saving lives. We train hard, but we also get breaks, rest periods, time to recover. What you do, day after day, year after year, that takes a different kind of strength. The leader, who had introduced himself as Chief Petty Officer David Chen, finished tightening the last lug nut and stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll forgive me if it seems too personal. How long have you been a nurse? 15 years, Maggie replied, wondering where this was leading. And, in those 15 years, how many lives do you think you've saved? How many people have gone home to their families because of your skill and dedication? Maggie had never really thought about it in those terms. I don't know, she said honestly. I mean, we work as a team in the hospital. It's not just one person who saves someone's life. It's doctors and nurses and technicians and support staff all working together. Chief Chen nodded thoughtfully. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're being too modest. The way you talk about your patients, the way you remember their names and their stories, that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of nurse you are. You don't just treat medical conditions, you treat human beings with dignity and compassion. The fourth SEAL, a young man named Petty Officer Tommy Rodriguez, had been quietly listening to the conversation while checking the air pressure in the spare tire. He looked up and said, Ma'am, my little sister was in the hospital when she was 8 years old. She had pneumonia, and she was really scared. There was this nurse who stayed with her all night, telling her stories and holding her hand when she couldn't sleep. That nurse probably doesn't remember my sister, but we'll never forget her. She made the difference between a terrifying experience and one where my sister felt safe and cared for. As the SEALs finished their work, Chief Chen made sure that everything was properly secured and that Maggie's car was safe to drive. He walked around the vehicle, checking each tire and testing the spare to make sure it would get her home safely. The level of care and attention they brought to this simple task was remarkable, and Maggie found herself deeply moved by their kindness. Ma'am, before you go, Chief Chen said, I need you to know something. We've served in some pretty intense situations around the world. We've seen courage in many forms, but what you do every day, that's a different kind of heroism. You save lives without carrying weapons, you face life and death situations without backup, and you do it all with compassion and grace. Petty Officer Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, in our line of work, we have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. But, after talking with you tonight, I realize that you live that reality every single day. Every shift brings new challenges, new people depending on you, new opportunities to make the difference between life and death. Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or exhaustion. She was overwhelmed by the genuine respect and appreciation these elite warriors were showing for her work. In 15 years of nursing, she had received thanks from patients and families, recognition from supervisors, and professional awards, but nothing had ever touched her quite like this moment. Thank you, she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to help me, especially after visiting your friend in the hospital. I hope he's going to be okay. Chief Chen's expression became more serious. He will be, ma'am. He's receiving the best possible care from people like you. That gives us great comfort and confidence. As Maggie prepared to get into her car, Petty Officer Williams approached her with something in his hand. Ma'am, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to give you this. He handed her a small challenge coin, the kind that military units use to recognize exceptional service or to build bonds between service members. The coin was heavy and substantial, with the Navy SEAL Trident emblem on one side and words that read honor, courage, commitment around the edge. On the reverse side was an inscription that simply said, "For those who serve others with honor." "This is too much," Maggie protested. "I can't accept this. These coins are for military personnel." "Ma'am," Chiefchin said with a slight smile, "that coin is given to people who understand what service really means. You've earned it more than many people who wear the uniform. You serve your community every day, putting others' needs before your own, and you do it with the kind of dedication that we recognize and respect." Maggie looked down at the coin in her palm, feeling its weight and understanding the significance of what she was being given. This wasn't just a piece of metal, it was recognition from some of America's most elite warriors that her service mattered, that what she did every day had value and meaning that extended far beyond her own understanding. The drive home was unlike any other journey Maggie had ever experienced. Despite her exhaustion, her mind was completely alert, processing everything that had just happened in the hospital parking garage. The challenge coin sat on her passenger seat, catching the light from passing street lamps and serving as a tangible reminder that the encounter hadn't been a dream brought on by sleep deprivation. As she navigated the familiar streets toward her apartment, Maggie found herself thinking about the conversation with the SEALs in a new way. For 15 years, she had thought of her work as simply her job, a profession she had chosen because she wanted to help people and make a difference in their lives. She had never compared herself to military service members or considered that what she did might be viewed as a form of heroism. The SEAL's words kept echoing in her mind: "You save lives without carrying weapons, you face life and death situations without backup, and you do it all with compassion and grace." Until tonight, Maggie had never thought about her work in those terms. She had always focused on the medical aspects of nursing, the technical skills and clinical knowledge required to provide excellent patient care. But the SEALs had helped her see something else entirely. When Maggie finally reached her small apartment complex, she sat in her car for a few minutes before going inside. The building was quiet, with most of her neighbors already asleep. Her unit was on the second floor, a modest one-bedroom space that she had turned into a comfortable home filled with books, plants, and photographs from her travels. It wasn't much, but after 36 hours at the hospital, it felt like a sanctuary. Inside her apartment, Maggie placed the challenge coin on her kitchen table and stared at it while she made herself a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast. She was too tired to cook anything elaborate, but her body needed fuel to recover from the marathon shift she had just completed. As she ate, she found herself thinking about each of the patients she had cared for over the past day and a half. Emma, the little girl with smoke inhalation, would probably go home in a day or two with nothing more than a scary memory and perhaps a new appreciation for brave princesses who wear special masks. Kevin, the teenager with the spinal injury, faced a longer and more uncertain recovery, but he would have the support of his family and a team of dedicated medical professionals. Robert and Dorothy would have their own challenges ahead, but their love for each other would see them through whatever came next. Each of these patients had touched Maggie's life in some way, and she realized now that she had touched theirs as well. Not just as a medical professional providing clinical care, but as a human being offering comfort, support, and hope during some of their most vulnerable moments. The SEALs had helped her understand that this connection between nurse and patient was something special, something that went beyond technical competence to the realm of genuine service. After finishing her meal, Maggie took a long, hot shower that helped wash away the physical and emotional residue of her extended shift. The warm water soothed her aching muscles and gave her a chance to process her emotions about everything that had happened. She thought about the moment when Chiefchin had looked her in the eye and told her that she understood what service really meant. Coming from a Navy SEAL, someone who had dedicated his life to serving his country in the most challenging circumstances imaginable, those words carried tremendous weight. As she got ready for bed, Maggie picked up the challenge coin again and examined it more closely. The craftsmanship was beautiful, with intricate details that spoke of the pride and tradition associated with the Navy SEALs. But what struck her most was the inscription, "For those who serve others with honor." She had never thought of her work as serving others with honor, but perhaps that's exactly what she had been doing all these years. Sleep came quickly despite the emotional intensity of the evening. Maggie's body was exhausted, and her mind finally allowed itself to rest after processing the events of the past 2 days. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, her body recovering from the physical demands of 36 hours on her feet while her spirit restored itself after being so deeply moved by the recognition she had received. She woke up late the next morning feeling more refreshed than she had in weeks. The extra sleep had done wonders for both her physical and emotional state, and she found herself eager to return to work despite having just completed one of the most challenging shifts of her career. But first, she had something important to do. Maggie called the hospital to check on several of her patients from the previous days. She learned that Emma had indeed gone home with her family, her lungs fully recovered from the smoke inhalation. Kevin was stable and had begun working with physical therapists to assess the extent of his mobility. Robert's condition had improved overnight, and doctors were optimistic about his recovery prospects. Hearing these updates filled Maggie with a sense of satisfaction and purpose that was familiar yet somehow more meaningful than before. Next, she called her supervisor to let her know about the flat tire incident and to express her gratitude for the way the hospital had handled the staffing crisis. Her supervisor, Janet Walsh, was a veteran nurse herself who had always been supportive of her staff, but she seemed particularly interested in hearing about Maggie's encounter with the SEALs. "You know, Maggie," Janet said, "I've been a nurse for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of dedication and professionalism in this field. But what you did during that shift, the way you stayed with Emma all night and gave so much of yourself to every patient who needed you, that's what nursing is really about. Those SEALs recognized something special, and they were right to honor you." The conversation with Janet helped Maggie understand that her experience wasn't just personally meaningful, it had broader implications for how she thought about her profession and her role within it. She began to see that nursing, at its best, really was a form of service that deserved recognition and respect from society as a whole. Over the next few days, Maggie found herself sharing the story of her encounter with the SEALs with her closest colleagues and friends. Each time she told it, she discovered new aspects of the experience that she hadn't fully processed initially. The way the SEALs had worked together to change her tire reflected their military training, but their decision to help a stranger reflected something deeper about their character and values. Her friend Sarah, who worked in the pediatric ICU, was particularly moved by the story. "Maggie, I think what happened to you is about more than just four nice guys helping you change a tire. I think it's about recognition and respect between people who understand what service means. They saw something in you that you might not have seen in yourself." This insight resonated deeply with Maggie. She had always been modest about her contributions as a nurse, focusing on the team effort required in healthcare rather than her individual role. But perhaps there was value in acknowledging that her work mattered, that her dedication and compassion made a real difference in people's lives. Maggie decided to learn more about the military healthcare system and the experiences of veterans in civilian hospitals. She discovered that many veterans had unique healthcare needs related to their service experiences, and that civilian healthcare providers could benefit from better understanding military culture and the challenges faced by those who had served their country. This research led her to volunteer with a local organization that provided support services to veterans and their families. She found that her nursing skills translated well to this work, but she also discovered that her encounter with the SEALs had given her a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by military service members and their families. Through her volunteer work, Maggie met many veterans who shared their own stories of service and sacrifice. Some had been injured in combat and required ongoing medical care. Others struggled with the transition from military to civilian life. All of them had made significant sacrifices in service to their country, and Maggie found herself honored to be able to give something back to them in return. One veteran, a former Army medic named Carlos Martinez, became a regular visitor to the hospital where Maggie worked. Carlos had been injured by an IED in Afghanistan and required frequent treatments for his injuries. Over time, he and Maggie developed a friendship based on their shared commitment to helping others. "You know, Maggie," Carlos told her one day, "what those SEALs did for you, that recognition they gave you, that's something we learn in the military. We're taught to recognize and honor service wherever we find it. What you do every day, the way you care for people when they're at their most vulnerable, that's service in the truest sense." Carlos helped Maggie understand that service comes in many forms, and that the dedication required to be an excellent nurse was similar in many ways to the dedication required to be an excellent soldier. Both required putting others' needs before your own, both demanded excellence under pressure, and both involved making sacrifices for the greater good. As weeks turned into months, Maggie found that her encounter with the SEALs had fundamentally changed how she viewed her work and her place in the world. She approached each shift with renewed energy and purpose, understanding that every patient interaction was an opportunity to serve others with honor and compassion. The challenge coin became a permanent fixture on her keychain, a daily reminder of the recognition she had received and the responsibility that came with it. Sometimes patients or colleagues would notice the coin and ask about its significance, giving Maggie opportunities to share her story and to talk about the importance of service in all its forms. Her work performance, which had always been excellent, reached new heights as she embraced her role as someone who truly understood what service meant. She became a mentor to newer nurses, sharing not just her clinical knowledge but also her insights about the deeper meaning and purpose of nursing as a profession. The story of her encounter with the SEALs spread throughout the hospital, inspiring other staff members to think more deeply about their own contributions to patient care. Janet Walsh, her supervisor, used Maggie's experience as an example during orientation sessions for new employees, helping them understand that their work was about much more than just technical skills and clinical procedures. Maggie also began speaking at nursing schools and professional conferences, sharing her story as a way to inspire the next generation of nurses. She talked about the importance of seeing nursing as a form of service, about the value of connecting with patients as human beings rather than just medical cases, and about the recognition that their work deserved from society as a whole. 6 months after her encounter with the Navy SEALs, Maggie received an unexpected phone call that would further transform her understanding of service and its impact on others. The caller introduced himself as Admiral James Mitchell, commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Group based in San Diego. He explained that he had heard about the incident in the hospital parking garage from Chief Petty Officer Chen and wanted to invite Maggie to a special ceremony. Ms. Chen, the Admiral said, using her professional name with the same respect that the SEALs had shown that night, we would be honored if you would attend our quarterly award ceremony as our special guest. We're recognizing several of our service members for exceptional performance, and we believe your presence would add significant meaning to the event. Maggie was both surprised and honored by the invitation. She had never attended a military ceremony before, and the idea of being a special guest at such an event was both exciting and intimidating. After thinking it over for a few days, she accepted the invitation, curious to learn more about military culture and to see the SEALs who had helped her in their professional environment. The ceremony was held at the Naval Base Coronado, and Maggie found herself amazed by the precision and tradition that characterized everything about the event. Service members moved with purpose and discipline, their uniforms were immaculate, and there was an air of solemnity and respect that she had never experienced in civilian settings. Chief Petty Officer Chen met her at the gate and served as her escort throughout the ceremony. He looked different in his dress uniform, more formal and official, but his warm smile and genuine respect for her remained unchanged. As they walked toward the ceremony location, he explained some of the traditions and protocols that would guide the event. "Ma'am, I want you to understand what an honor this is," he said as they approached the building where the ceremony would be held. "We don't often invite civilians to these events, especially not as special guests. But Admiral Mitchell felt strongly that your presence here would remind everyone why we serve and who we're protecting." The ceremony began with the presentation of colors and the playing of the national anthem. Maggie found herself deeply moved by the sight of these elite warriors standing at attention, their faces reflecting the pride and commitment they felt toward their country and their mission. She thought about her own service as a nurse and began to understand more clearly the connections between military service and civilian service. Admiral Mitchell delivered opening remarks that emphasized the values of honor, courage, and commitment that defined the SEAL teams. He spoke about the importance of excellence in everything they did, from their most dangerous missions to their interactions with the communities they served. Then, unexpectedly, he called Maggie to the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Admiral said, "I want to introduce you to someone who embodies the same values we hold dear. Margaret Chen is a trauma nurse at San Diego General Hospital, and 6 months ago, she completed a 36-hour shift caring for patients in the emergency department. Her dedication to service, her commitment to excellence, and her compassion for others represent the very best of what it means to serve. Maggie felt her face flush as she stood before this assembly of elite warriors. The Admiral continued his remarks, describing the encounter in the parking garage and explaining how Chief Chan and his team had been moved by her dedication and professionalism. He talked about the challenge coin they had given her and what it represented in terms of recognition between service members. "Nurse Chen represents something important," Admiral Mitchell said. "She reminds us that service comes in many forms, and that the values we cherish in the military are shared by civilians who dedicate their lives to helping others. Her work saves lives every day, often under difficult circumstances, and always with the same commitment to excellence that we expect from our own service members." The Admiral then presented Maggie with a special commendation, a formal recognition of her service to the community and her embodiment of military values in a civilian context. The document was beautifully crafted and signed by several high-ranking officers, acknowledging her as an honorary member of the Naval Special Warfare community. After the ceremony, Maggie was invited to a reception where she had the opportunity to meet with many of the service members and their families. She discovered that several of the SEALs had family members who worked in healthcare, and that her story had resonated throughout the community in ways she hadn't expected. One SEAL wife, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez whose husband was deployed overseas, approached Maggie with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for what you do," she said. "When my husband is away, knowing that there are people like you taking care of our community gives me such comfort. You're protecting the home front while our husbands protect our country." This perspective opened Maggie's eyes to another dimension of service that she hadn't fully considered. While military service members deployed around the world to protect American interests and values, civilian service providers like healthcare workers, teachers, and first responders maintained the safety and well-being of communities at home. Both forms of service were essential, and both required similar levels of dedication and sacrifice. During the reception, Maggie also met with the SEAL who had been in the hospital the night she encountered Chief Chen's team. Petty Officer First Class Michael Torres had been recovering from injuries sustained during a training exercise, and he wanted to personally thank her for the care he had received from the hospital staff. "Ma'am, I want you to know that the nurses and doctors who took care of me made all the difference in my recovery," Torres said. "It wasn't just the medical treatment, though that was excellent. It was the way you all treated me like a person, not just a patient. You made me feel like my service mattered and that you were honored to care for someone who had served his country." This conversation helped Maggie understand that healthcare providers had a special opportunity to honor military service through the quality of care they provided to veterans and active duty personnel. She realized that every veteran who came through her emergency department deserved not just excellent medical care, but also recognition and respect for their service to the country. Following the ceremony, Maggie's relationship with the SEAL community continued to develop. She was invited to participate in community outreach programs where SEALs and other military personnel worked with civilian organizations to strengthen the bonds between the military and the communities they served. These programs gave her opportunities to share her perspective on healthcare and service while learning more about military culture and values. One particularly meaningful project involved developing a training program for hospital staff on how to better serve veterans and military families. Maggie worked with military healthcare professionals to create educational materials that helped civilian healthcare workers understand the unique needs and experiences of those who had served in the military. The program addressed issues like post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and other conditions that were common among veterans but less familiar to civilian healthcare providers. It also covered cultural aspects of military service that could affect how veterans interacted with healthcare systems and how providers could show appropriate respect and recognition for their service. Through this work, Maggie discovered that many veterans had difficulty accessing or navigating civilian healthcare systems. Some were hesitant to seek care because they felt that civilian providers didn't understand their experiences or appreciate their service. Others struggled with the transition from military medicine, which operated under different principles and protocols than civilian healthcare. Maggie became an advocate for veteran-friendly healthcare practices in her hospital and throughout the San Diego healthcare community. She worked with administrators to implement policies that recognized veteran status and ensured that former service members received appropriate acknowledgement for their military service during their healthcare encounters. These efforts led to tangible improvements in how veterans were treated at her hospital. Staff members were trained to recognize military service and to express appropriate gratitude and respect. Special programs were developed to help veterans navigate the healthcare system and access the services they needed. The hospital also established partnerships with veteran service organizations to provide comprehensive support for former service members and their families. The success of these initiatives brought Maggie to the attention of healthcare leaders throughout California and beyond. She was invited to speak at conferences and to consult with other hospitals that wanted to improve their services to veterans and military families. Her unique perspective as a civilian healthcare provider who had been honored by the military community gave her credibility with both audiences. During one particularly memorable conference, Maggie shared the stage with a retired Army general who had served in multiple combat deployments before transitioning to civilian leadership in the healthcare industry. General Sarah Washington had been instrumental in developing military medical protocols that saved countless lives on battlefields around the world. What Nurse Chin represents, General Washington told the audience, is the best of both worlds. She brings civilian healthcare expertise to bear on the needs of military families, while also understanding and respecting the values and culture of military service. This combination is essential if we're going to provide the best possible care for those who have served our country. The General's endorsement further elevated Maggie's profile in both the healthcare and veteran communities. She received invitations to serve on advisory committees and boards of directors for organizations that supported veterans and their families. These roles gave her opportunities to influence policy and practice at a much broader level than she had ever imagined possible. Through all of these experiences, Maggie never lost sight of her primary role as a bedside nurse caring for patients in the emergency department. She continued to work her regular shifts, taking care of trauma victims, heart attack patients, and families in crisis. But her perspective on this work had been fundamentally transformed by her understanding of its connection to service and sacrifice. Each patient interaction became an opportunity to practice the values she had learned from the military community: honor, courage, and commitment. She approached every case with the understanding that she was serving not just an individual patient, but also their family, their community, and the broader society that depended on healthcare providers to be there when needed most. The challenge coin remained on her keychain, but it had been joined by other tokens of recognition from the military and veteran communities. She had been made an honorary member of several veteran organizations and had received awards from military medical associations. But perhaps most meaningful to her were the personal thank you notes from veterans and their families who had been touched by her care and advocacy. 2 years after her encounter with the Navy SEALs, Maggie stood before a packed auditorium at the National Nurses Association annual conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address about service, sacrifice, and the deeper meaning of healthcare. The audience included thousands of nurses from across the country, representing every specialty and level of experience in the profession. As she looked out at the sea of faces, Maggie thought back to that exhausting night in the hospital parking garage when 4 strangers had changed her understanding of herself and her work forever. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had evolved into a movement that was transforming how healthcare providers and military service members viewed each other and their shared commitment to serving others. 2 years ago, Maggie began, I thought I knew what it meant to be a nurse. I understood the technical aspects of patient care, the clinical skills required to save lives, and the emotional demands of working with people during their most vulnerable moments. But I had never considered that what we do as nurses is a form of service that deserves the same recognition and respect that we give to our military heroes. The audience was immediately engaged, leaning forward in their seats as Maggie described her marathon 36-hour shift and the encounter with the SEALs that had followed. She talked about the challenge coin, the ceremony at Naval Base Coronado, and the relationships she had built within the military community. But, more importantly, she shared how these experiences had transformed her understanding of nursing as a profession and a calling. The Navy SEALs who helped me that night saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, she continued. They recognized that the values they held dear, honor, courage, and commitment, were the same values that guided my work as a nurse. They understood that saving lives in a trauma bay requires the same kind of courage as saving lives on a battlefield, just in a different context. Maggie went on to describe the programs and initiatives that had grown out of her connection with the military community. She talked about the veteran-friendly healthcare practices that had been implemented at her hospital and dozens of others across the country. She shared statistics showing improved satisfaction scores among veteran patients and better health outcomes for military families who received care from providers trained in military-aware healthcare practices. But, perhaps most importantly, she challenged her audience to think differently about their own work and its place in society. "We are not just healthcare providers," she said. "We are servants of our communities, guardians of human dignity, and heroes in our own right." The person who codes in the ICU at 3 in the morning, the nurse who holds a frightened child while their parents wait outside, the charge nurse who manages chaos and keeps everyone safe, these are acts of service that deserve recognition and respect. The response from the audience was overwhelming. Nurses throughout the auditorium stood to applaud, many with tears in their eyes as they recognized their own experiences in Maggie's words. During the question and answer session that followed, speaker after speaker shared their own stories of dedication, sacrifice, and commitment to patient care. One nurse from a rural emergency department in Montana talked about working alone during overnight shifts, being the only healthcare provider for hundreds of miles when emergencies occurred. Another described her work in an inner-city hospital where violence and poverty created constant challenges for both patients and staff. A pediatric ICU nurse shared her experience of caring for critically ill children while supporting their families through the most difficult moments of their lives. Each story reinforced Maggie's central message: nursing is a form of service that requires courage, dedication, and sacrifice, and nurses deserve recognition for their contributions to society. The audience began to see their work not just as jobs or careers, but as callings that connected them to a larger community of people committed to serving others. Following the conference, Maggie's message continued to spread throughout the healthcare community. The National Nurses Association adopted her framework of service with honor as a central theme for their professional development programs. Nursing schools began incorporating discussions of service and sacrifice into their curricula, helping future nurses understand the deeper meaning of their chosen profession. The military connection that had started with 4 SEALs in a parking garage evolved into formal partnerships between healthcare organizations and military units throughout the country. Joint training exercises brought military medics and civilian healthcare providers together to share knowledge and best practices. Exchange programs allowed nurses to work in military hospitals while service members gained experience in civilian healthcare settings. These collaborations benefited both communities. Military medical personnel gained exposure to the latest civilian healthcare technologies and treatment protocols, while civilian providers learned valuable lessons about working under pressure, maintaining composure in crisis situations, and supporting each other through difficult circumstances. Maggie found herself at the center of many of these initiatives, serving as a bridge between two communities that had always shared common values but hadn't always recognized their connections. She continued working as a bedside nurse while also taking on roles as a consultant, speaker, and advocate for better integration between military and civilian healthcare. One particularly meaningful project involved developing a mentorship program that paired experienced nurses with military service members transitioning to civilian careers in healthcare. Many veterans had medical training from their military service but needed support navigating civilian healthcare systems and adapting their skills to new environments. Through this program, Maggie worked with former military medics, corpsmen, and other healthcare specialists as they pursued nursing degrees or other healthcare careers. She helped them understand how their military experience translated to civilian settings while also learning from their unique perspectives on trauma care, emergency medicine, and working under pressure. One of her mentors was Carlos Martinez, the former Army medic she had met during her volunteer work with veterans. Carlos had decided to pursue a nursing degree after his military service, and Maggie had supported him throughout his education and transition to civilian healthcare. Now a registered nurse himself, Carlos worked alongside Maggie in the emergency department, bringing his military medical experience to bear on civilian trauma cases. Maggie taught me that the values I learned in the Army, putting others first, maintaining excellence under pressure, never leaving anyone behind, these are the same values that make someone an excellent nurse, Carlos explained to new nursing students during orientation sessions. The only difference is the uniform we wear and the setting where we serve. The partnership between Maggie and Carlos became a model for military-civilian collaboration in healthcare. Their complementary skills and shared commitment to service excellence made them an exceptionally effective team, and their example inspired other healthcare organizations to actively recruit and support veterans entering civilian healthcare careers. As Maggie's reputation grew, she received invitations to speak at military installations around the world. She addressed audiences of service members and their families, sharing her perspective on civilian healthcare and encouraging them to see healthcare providers as partners in their service to community and country. During one particularly moving presentation at a forward operating base in Germany, Maggie spoke to military medical personnel who were preparing for deployment to combat zones. She talked about the connections between battlefield medicine and civilian trauma care, emphasizing how the skills and values they brought to their military service would continue to serve them throughout their lives. Whether you're treating a wounded warrior in Afghanistan or a car accident victim in Detroit, the principles are the same, she told them. You're using your knowledge, skills, and courage to save lives and reduce suffering. You're putting others before yourself and committing to excellence even when circumstances are difficult. This is service in its purest form. After her presentation, a young Navy corpsman approached her with a question that would stay with her for years to come. "Ma'am, how do we make sure that when we transition back to civilian life, we don't lose the sense of purpose and mission that drives us here?" Maggie's answer came from her heart: you find ways to continue serving others, whether that's in healthcare, education, public safety, or any other field where you can make a difference in people's lives. The uniform might change, but the calling to serve others with honor never has to end. This conversation inspired Maggie to develop a new initiative focused on helping military service members understand how their values and skills could translate to various civilian service professions. Working with career counselors and veteran service organizations, she created resources that showed the connections between military service and careers in nursing, teaching, social work, emergency services, and other fields dedicated to helping others. The initiative, called Service Continues, became a national program that helped thousands of veterans find meaningful civilian careers that allowed them to continue their commitment to serving others. It also helped civilian organizations understand the value that veterans could bring to their work and how to create veteran-friendly workplace cultures. Through all of these experiences, Maggie never forgot the simple human moment that had started it all, for tired warriors taking time to help a stranger change a tire after visiting their wounded teammate in the hospital. That act of kindness had grown into something much larger, but its essence remained the same: people recognizing their shared commitment to serving others and supporting each other in that service. 10 years after her encounter with the SEALs, Maggie was invited back to Naval Base Coronado for a special ceremony commemorating the anniversary of her first visit. The auditorium was packed with active duty personnel, veterans, healthcare providers, and community leaders who had been touched by the programs and initiatives that had grown out of that parking garage encounter. Chief Petty Officer Chen, now a Command Master Chief, introduced Maggie to the audience with words that captured the essence of what had been accomplished. 10 years ago, 4 of our teammates helped a tired nurse change a tire. That simple act of service recognition sparked a movement that has strengthened the bonds between our military and civilian communities and reminded all of us why we serve. As Maggie stood at the podium where she had first been recognized by the military community, she looked out at an audience that included many of the people whose lives had been changed by their shared commitment to service. She saw nurses who had been inspired to view their work differently, veterans who had found new purpose in civilian healthcare careers, and military service members who understood their connection to the broader community of people dedicated to helping others. 10 years ago, she said, I learned that service comes in many forms, but it's always characterized by the same values: putting others first, maintaining excellence under pressure, and never giving up on the people who depend on us. Whether we wear military uniforms or hospital scrubs, whether we serve on battlefields or in emergency departments, we are united by our commitment to protecting and caring for others. The challenge coin that had started it all remained on her keychain, now worn smooth by years of daily handling. But its message had spread far beyond that single token of recognition. Across the country, thousands of healthcare providers and military service members wore similar coins, carried similar stories, and shared the understanding that true service knows no boundaries and recognizes no distinctions between those who choose to dedicate their lives to helping others. As the ceremony concluded and the audience dispersed, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as one of the most exhausting and difficult days of her nursing career had become the foundation for a life dedicated to bridging communities and honoring service in all its forms. The tired nurse who had struggled to change a tire in a hospital parking garage had become a voice for recognition, respect, and unity among all those who choose to serve others with honor.